We're going to take a look at High Treason. Very recently, let me give you some of the history behind this. Very recently, Alex Berry, the designer of this game, sent me a review copy of Corrupt Bargain. He threw this in as a gift. This is an older VPG game, doesn't need any kind of reviews or anything. Is probably not even available anymore, which is a pity from what I can see so far. I haven't played it yet. And he's someone, as I explained in the Corrupt Bargain reviews or intro, he's someone that I had a friendly relationship with online, just discussing games and whatnot. And we had a lot of ideas that, you know, kind of aligned. And he used to do reviews as well, which I found very helpful. I didn't know he was the designer of this. My only experience with it is when I was at Consim Expo one time, Alan Emmerich, the owner of the company, was demoing it for someone else. And I looked at it and said, huh, that looks kind of neat. The thing that I didn't really, that kind of dissuaded me from chasing it down at all, was all these tracks and everything led me to think that it was going to be kind of like a States of Siege game. And in some ways it is, but it's not solo. It's a two-player game. So this covers the trial of Louis Riel, and my pronunciations are not checked. I fake them as I can. A mestiz, part native, part French trapper family, who led a couple of revolts and ended up, accused of a murder. The first revolt, he ran to the United States, became a U.S. citizen, but then came back to stage another one, which was less successful, ended up in him being caught and tried. Now, kind of an obscure thing. There's a couple of interesting things about the trial. There were only 6 jurors on the trial, even though it's a capital case, and that's like apparently against Canadian law. But that helps limit the size of the juror pool, which is important because in this game you track the jurors individually to some extent as to what they think. And you have a number of ways to do that. At the beginning, you have a few things that you know about them, though. Well, you know that they have some kind of alignment religiously, linguistically, and according to their occupation. And you'll be going through stages of a normal trial, including jury selection, where you get to quiz them about these things, which, you know, have an intrinsic bias built in, more than is shown just on the charts here. It's also baked into the cards. And you're going to try to, achieve the best jury out of your pool of 12 that you can, reducing it to 6. Okay. That's one neat factor of this. You also know how powerful they will be, and that's just exposed, which I find a little iffy. I kind of wish there was an additional counter for that, how much sway they will have on other jurors, which is the number of action points. Now, that too is something that can probably be gained during jury selection, knowledge of, hey, how much is this guy going to be able to, stand their own ground? How much are they going to be able to affect other people's decision making and whatever? So anyway, that's the things that you know at the beginning. One is a set you don't know, but you know that they have one of each. You're also going to track the effects of the trial in terms of how they're going to impact people with those leanings, right? So each of these tracks is going to have a number associated with it. The counter is going to be sitting on a number that is the degree of guilt that particular trait is going to associate with the victim, defendant. You also are going to track specific evidence of guilt, and if it doesn't go above 1, the judge will just throw the trial out for not showing enough evidence to even bring to the jury. And evidence of insanity, which can serve as a defense. And it's going to be kind of a card-driven game, and we'll take a look at how those work without peeking at them yet. But they're going to give you an option, basically the ops versus events option. But there's usually more than one event on each card, which is kind of a neat little twist there. And some of the cards are more aligned with one person than the other, but you always have the option to play for the operational points. Operational points will let you tinker around with these values and tinker around with the jurors. Like I said, there's different stages in the game that have to be accounted for. Now, I have one other game that I know of that only handles, that the whole scope of the game is a trial. There are games that include trials on a very limited basis, things like Republic of Rome. Hero of Weehawken, I think, had a trial at the end, but it was basically one of the scoring options. That was another VPG game. And I did that way, way back. I barely remember it, but it was kind of cool. But most of that game is spent trying to assemble the plot rather than, actually holding it in trial. No, the only one I have was something put out by Gotti Games, and I'm not able to track whether or not this is related to John Gotti. However, he was big on games, actually, which is an interesting thing. But the designer is not John Gotti, and it's not someone I could find as being related to him. Called Legal Decision, I believe. It was a really, really horrible game, but with a great idea. It had a huge, huge quantity of different evidence cards, and basically, yes, you were swaying jurors, but nowhere near the detail that you've got here, and none of this, kind of alignment of different tracks and trying to, position yourself across the board to jurors. This kind of system would have worked a lot better than that. And that one also had very much of our justice system sucks, man. And not just in terms of you're getting railroaded by it, if you're a defendant, but also in some of the quirky ways in which you can just screw it up as the defendant, as the defense attorney, how you can screw up the chances of a conviction by using certain, what are really just luck cards. Here it's a more clever looking game from what I can tell. Again, I haven't played it. I'm just taking this first look at it. I didn't want to start playing right away. Now, you're going to have 5 phases to the game. First is jury selection. And during this, the 2 players will be trying to look at information about the different jurors, and then they will get the opportunity to dismiss all in an alternating fashion 6 of the jurors. So each person gets to get rid of 3. You don't need reasons or whatever. Okay, then you hit phases 2 and 3, which is the trial in chief. Now, unlike a regular trial, you're not going to be breaking it up into the prosecution, then the defense, then your rebuttals and whatever. It's not set up that way. It's all kind of mangled together. You can try to picture it as this is the prosecution part, this is the defense part. We'll see how well that fits with the evidence cards, but the decision was made to abstract that away and make it more of an interactive play throughout. And you'll see how that works. During the course of the game, starting with jury selection and continuing through the trial in chief portions, you have these, which I don't remember what they're called. Their name does not evoke what they mean to me. Plea marker. Yeah. When I think plea deals. I guess you could say it's pleading your case at the end, which I think fits more, because what's under here is a set of cards that you'll use in your summation to have sort of a last-ditch effort to change things. And it may be very important to put certain kinds of cards there and other types elsewhere. There's a lot of legal counsel notes that'll help you figure out the strategy of the game, give you some clues towards the strategy of the game before you know, say on your first play or whatever. So you don't just get shafted by like, well, I don't know what's good to keep and what's not. They give you hints towards that. Sometimes those hints aren't right, but they do give you some guidance as to how to play the game the first time. I have no idea how well the hints fit on this, but I've played games where like they tell you to do something and it's like, well, that's just stupid after you've played it a couple of times, but that's okay. Okay, so after everybody gets a chance to move some of these tracks, and the jurors, again, with the final summation, that's what they're going to be doing in the trial portions as well. Finally, you do jury deliberation. Now, jury deliberation, basically you reveal these, you get these deliberation action points. If you control a juror fully, if you've completely swayed him, which is going to be these circles in here up to locked, then you have the capacity to use that juror to try and influence other jurors. And I think maybe track markers as well. And that's, you know, sort of the last chance to play things, but it allows your strategy to play out in one additional way. And then finally, you just do a calculation, which is going to be a summation of at heart, it's going to be a summation of the values. So for example, if this guy's Protestant, he'd be worth 5 points towards conviction. If he's English, he'd be worth 2 towards conviction. Interesting. And if he's, you know, a farmer, he'd be worth 4 more, and you'd add those together. There's some multiplicative effects to that for certain, for being locked, for example. And there are other things that mangle into the vote count as a whole. And then, quite simply, the total of all 6 jurors, if it breaks 100, he's convicted. I don't really know how these kick in. We'll see that when we look at the details of everything. So that's the broad overview of it. Let's take a look at some of those details. At the beginning of the game in jury selection, each player is going to get 7 cards from the trial deck. Now, there's a set of optional cards in this game, what-if cards. I've thrown them in. Here it says, in the very end, it's assumed that Louis Royale's closest allies have not escaped and are also on trial. The way I look at it is, it may not reflect all of them, and it may not be in the same trial, but these are all things that didn't come into the trial but could have, and one of them includes throwing out a juror, which I really, really wanted to put in, and I don't think that impacts either player. But then I made the decision, you know, his U.S. citizenship could have been made as an argument, but it wasn't, and there's no reason it wasn't. There was a guy who was convicted of in a different trial who didn't testify in this one, but he could have. There were some people who fled to the U.S. who didn't come to the trial, who weren't brought to trial, but, you know, if I'm going to throw a couple of them in, I figured why not throw them all in. It's possible that you get those cards and they don't get used for anything that relates to that person. They just get used for action points or whatever. So to me, it feels fine to put them in from sort of a subject matter type of aspect, because I want to avoid the word thematic. Because I know Alex will rag on me if I use it in that sort of sense, because that's how he would use it, and I argue against it. Okay. All right, so each player gets 7 cards at the beginning. The prosecutor begins to play. They play 5 cards in a row, one after the other, for an effect. And then they put 2 cards aside under their plea marker. Then the defense plays 5 cards in a row for effect. Again, this is to reveal things about the jurors. And then they set 2 aside. Now, obviously, that gives an advantage to the defense. They get to see what the prosecutors learned and shows face up before they make their own choices, which is kind of nice. Then, beginning with the prosecution, each player dismisses a juror one at a time until you're down to 6. Fairly simple. What about card play? How do they work? Well, some of the cards have okay. The cards have events and they also have action points. Let's look at the events first. Most of the events will require you to reveal a certain number of markers for a given trait. So like here, reveal 3 occupation, and it'll be for this particular section. Like each card has events for each section of the game. Reveal 3 occupation markers or 2 religion markers, right? So you have a choice between the 2. You make your pick based on what it is. Some events let you peek at markers. For that, you would look at it secretly, and then you would point it towards yourself to indicate that you're the only person who knows it, and you're allowed to look at it any time from the game once it's pointed at you. If the other person gets to peek at it or reveals it, it'll get flipped over because you both know what it is. Some cards trigger a special event during jury selection. You just follow the event on the card. You can't forego an event. Each card is placed on the common discard pile after it's been played. But you can hold 2 cards for your plea pile, which may mean that you have events that you'd rather not play during this, but you may also have things that you really want to get in there. And they talk a little bit about here. See, it's good to know a little about many jurors rather than everything about just a couple. I don't know. Don't focus too much on the trait markers. Okay. All right. A lot of machination was put around getting Rail convicted. Okay. Once you've played all the cards, you get to dismiss the jury members, and this is just without any reason or cause. You've looked at things. You can make up your causes. You can almost always make up a cause in a real trial. You dismiss 3 each, and you alternate to do that. Okay, then we hit the main phase of the game, the trial in chief. In this phase, the prosecution and defense will be playing cards and essentially swearing witnesses and providing evidence throughout the game. Okay, you reshuffle any discarded cards back into the trial deck. Each player gets 7 cards. First, the prosecution and then the defense plays 1 card from their hand, alternating. After 5 card plays, 2 additional cards get stuck under the plea deal. After each card play, you have to decide whether or not you want to use it for action points or its trial in chief events. For action points, this is your ops, you use the number of points specified on the card. You must use them all. Well, there's no reason not to. 1 action is swaying a juror. This costs 1 action point. You put a sway marker, that's these, of your appropriate color on the juror. On a juror of your choice. You can do a maximum of 2 of these per juror per trial card. If the opponent has sway markers on there, you have to remove his using this mechanism instead, one at a time. You don't simply flip them. As soon as all the fields on a juror card are filled with sway markers, the juror is convinced and locked. This means only specific events that allow, and whatever, only specific play mechanisms that allow you to affect locked jurors will allow you to hit that person. That person's basically convinced one way or the other, as much as they can be. Another option that you can take, and here they say locked jurors who are sympathetic to the opponent. This will benefit you later on because their value scores are modified by that. But argue an aspect. For this, you can move one aspect marker one space in either direction, and you put a sway marker of your type on that track, on the track. An aspect marker can never be moved below 1 or above 10. All three fields next to the aspect marker are filled with sway markers, no matter whose. The jury determines the subject has been exhausted and that aspect track has been closed. Action points can no longer sway a closed aspect track. However, there are events that will explicitly do so. You can move an aspect marker one space on your turn with this action. If you want to move an aspect marker 2 spaces, you have to argue an aspect in depth. But you could argue multiple aspects at one point each. Argue an aspect in depth. This costs you 3 action points, which is a big amount. This works just like argue one aspect, except the aspect marker is moved 2 spaces. Use this action to move an aspect marker you have not already moved with argue one aspect. You place only 1 sway marker still, and you can make 1 normal or 1 depth argument for an aspect per trial card. Yeah. Otherwise, no one would do that. Implement trial and chief events. When you play a card for the event instead of the action points, you read the event as stated. Many of the cards have more than 1 event. You choose which one you want to implement. If the event allows you to move markers on the aspect place tracks, you do not place sway markers unless it tells you to. I don't know if any do. An attorney card is a normal trial card that's very strong for one of the 2 sides. So it'll say like prosecution attorney. And can perform special events. Each player can use an attorney also just for its action points. The special events, I believe, the special effects will be marked in, they're events. So I believe there'll be just events on there. Some of these are spelled out though. Objection. If it's an attorney card intended for your side, for example, if you're the prosecution, you need a prosecution attorney card, you can play this to prevent a chosen event from the opposing player. It can't be used to prevent action points. When used, the 2 cards are discarded without further effect, but now you have a smaller hand, which you do not replace, and it's possible that you may end up leaving your opponent with several plays in a row that you can't answer because of it. I'm not sure how many. I think they may get 1 extra play out of it at most. Well, no, because you're playing 2 cards in a row. You're canceling their event, and then you're playing your own play. So yeah, it could actually snowball pretty nasty. Reopening an aspect. Remove all the sway markers from an aspect box, and then move it 2 spaces in whichever direction. And you've reopened the aspect with new convincing reason, and now it can be debated again. Compelling persuasion of jurors. Place a number of sway markers equal to the total number of the attorney card's action points to convince any jurors the usual way. Through this, you can unlock jurors that are locked. In addition, there's no limit to how many sway markers that can be placed from a single juror in this action. Could be very, very potent. I don't know how I'm doing on time. Okay. Now, here they say moment of insight. Here they're talking about moment of clarity. I think that's the same thing. I think it's just a typo there. But okay. Some of the events for phases 2 and 3, trial and chief, provide a moment of insight. That'll be a little lightning bolt. Hey, we got a picture there. The icon can be red, blue, or green. Green is usable by both players. Red is prosecution, blue is defense. And that's for these things too, for everything, red and blue. Red is that side of the table, blue is this side. And that's where they sit. If you use a moment of insight, you can either randomly reveal one of your opponent's face-down plea cards, one of the ones they've got here. That remains face up and can be viewed anytime until the beginning of the summation phase. So you have an idea of what your opponent is going to be able to do at the end. You can exchange one of your plea cards with a card in your hand. The plea card is placed in your hand and the card from your hand is put in your plea deck, which might allow you to fix something that's a problem. Now, called of a mulligan, this appears to just be an opportunity that each player has. I don't believe it requires a moment of insight. The structure makes it kind of hard to tell. Once per game during phases 2 or 3, on your turn, you may pass in order to take a mulligan. You discard all your cards and redraw one less than the number discarded into your hand. Then flip your plea marker to show the word mulligan. Once the plea marker is flipped, you can no longer call a mulligan. It's once per player per game. And then it hands it off to the opponent. I'm probably going to be really iffy on using this at all. Here they talk about, well, remember, with mulligan, you will only set aside 2 cards under your plea marker at the end of the phase. If you mulligan too late, it can be fatal for you. I think that's very much too late. Like, if you only have 2 cards and you mulligan, now you only have 1 card to put under here or something. I don't know. I think that's what it's trying to express. The phase is over when both players are down to 2 cards in their hand. These 2 cards are automatically set aside under the plea, adding to the existing 2 cards there. There's an issue with that, but we'll talk about that in a bit. The opponent continues to play until they only have 2 cards left, which are then set aside under their plea marker. Remember, they might have more plays left than just 1. Phase 3 Trial in Chief. This is the same as Phase 2, except trial cards in the discard pile are not shuffled back into the deck. Okay, this is the same. This is the only thing that's stated with this. The end phase states that you put the 2 cards, adding to the existing 2 cards there. Well, I think there'd be a slight difference here. You'd be adding to the 4 or maybe less cards in existence here. That's the only iffy part that's there, and I don't consider that a real problem. It's just, hey, it's the kind of thing my head zooms at. Okay, so you do that trial in chief twice with different hands, and now you've got a hand presumably of 6 cards sitting here, which is for your summation. For the summation, both players take their 6 cards that they have under their plea. The prosecution plays 3 cards, one after another. Then the defense plays all 6 cards. Then the prosecution plays 3 cards. In this phase, your cards are either worth 2 action points or for any summation event on the card. If you play for 2 action points, you can only use these on unlocked jurors to sway a juror each for 1 action point. Now, remember, swaying a juror can move a juror you can do it 2 spaces. So that's not that terrible. Like, you only have 2 points, so that's what you can do. If you play for the event, you implement the event listed under the summation event. Many trial cards have more than 1 event. You must choose one to implement. If your event allows you to move markers on the trait tracks, you do not place any sway markers there at this point. Attorney cards. The attorney cards can be played for one of their events during the summation. These events are the objection, which can be done the same as it was before. Open a juror's eyes. Remove all sway markers from a juror, even if he's locked, and place 1 sway marker of your color on it. That's pretty potent, too. The objection is, of course, potent. You can cancel out opening a juror's eyes, I guess. Compelling persuasion of jurors. Place a number of sway markers equal to the total number of attorney cards action points to convince the jurors, but not lock jurors in the usual way. This is not limited to the 2. Now, in the other one, you were able to, I believe, hit lock jurors? Yes. So using compelling persuasion earlier, you could unlock someone. You can't unlock someone here. Slight difference. Okay, and it's time to swap batteries. Yay. Now you evaluate the 2 evidence tracks and use deliberation action points of your locked jurors and then determine victory. So first consideration of guilt. If the guilt marker is not at least 2, the judge throws the case out. There's no proof. If the guilt marker is exactly on space 2, nothing further happens. If it's on space 3 or 4, you place prosecution sway markers on each juror that's not already locked. So getting a lot of guilt evidence will help sway the jurors even if your other mechanisms have not worked on them. But you really don't want the opponent to have things locked if you go for that. If the insanity marker, this is consideration of insanity, is on space 0 or 1, nothing happens. If it's on spaces 2, 3, or 4, each aspect marker moves 1, 2, or 3 spaces towards the defense. And that's these tracks. So you would get more compassion from each. Then you reveal all the hidden trait markers on the jury. Now the jury withdraws for deliberation, where the locked jurors are allowed to try to convince the other jurors. I love this part. I love the idea of you continue the game into the jury deliberations. Just the idea. There's just so much here I really like. I haven't played it yet. I don't know how well it's gonna all work out, but as an idea, I'm just, I'm always stunned at what people come up with for games. Some of them are so derivative and everything, and I'm kind of used to that, especially in the wargame world. But and honestly, in a lot of the Euro world too. But when I look at something like this, I'm like, yeah, you came up with a really cool sounding, at least, mechanism for representing something. It's intuitive and it looks playable. I can usually manage 1 or 2 of those, but not all 3. Okay, so locked jurors will be spending their deliberative action points, first the prosecution and then alternating between. When it's your turn, you pick one of your locked jurors, use its deliberation action for one of 2 options. On an open aspect track, open I guess meaning that it has no sway markers, that matches an aspect on your locked juror, you can move the aspect marker 1 space in your direction and you put a sway marker in that aspect track. So you can, during jury deliberations, push that aspect a little further if it hasn't been fully discussed. On an unlocked juror who matches with at least 1 aspect on your locked juror, you can place a sway marker on your selected juror per matching aspect. You can place a total of up to 3 if you match all aspects. 2 jurors who have no matches whatsoever can't sway each other. So this is the, hey, we're alike, here's my arguments, and they make sense to you. Okay, then after all that's done, and it may be possible that you can't use all your deliberative actions or something for whatever reason, or they don't have any effect. Because these may be filled, everybody could be locked, or everybody who thinks at all like you could be. I mean, I could just see cases where they would be fairly odd, though. Okay, you total the value of the 3 aspects from the tracks for each juror. If the juror is locked by the prosecution, you double that total. If it's locked by the defense, you halve it. Then, for each prosecution sway marker, you add 1 to the total. For each defense sway marker, you subtract 1 for the total. It is conceivable that a juror could have a negative value, and that juror will give you negative points to the whole outcome. You total the guilt value for all 6 jurors. If it's 100 or more, the prosecution wins. If it's 99 or less, the defense wins. That probably just means a hung jury. They were unable to convince everybody to hang Rial. And yes, he makes that cute little pun. Some little examples of play, which I have actually looked over. Design notes. Alex reveals that he's an attorney himself, and that he wanted to mix the attorney and gaming, and taking, his view inside the legal process. I don't really feel like, like I say, this seems to apply as a good simulation of the legal system, as I understand it, but I don't feel like you really need to be an attorney to have figured this out. Sometimes it isn't really necessary. I don't even know if he's, a trial attorney, right? But you can watch a trial and get some of the ideas of this. The key thing is, how do you represent, the valuation of the different jurors? And this is very, very interesting, dividing this up. It works, he's come up with a good mechanism for this particular trial, I believe. But let's take a look at, the legal decision one. What would you have, you might have race as an issue, although I don't know that race is really an issue in that trial at all. You might have urban versus suburban, law and order versus a little bit of freedom. It's hard to tell. Here, there's very, very clear divisions that actually did feed into the trial, and the prosecution made a very, very strong attempt to match things. Now, race is obviously an important one in some of our modern U.S. cases, where, it's one of the first things the media ever brings up is, well, there's only one black juror on the, it's like, yeah, that is a little odd, isn't it? But anyway, that's a very clear indication. The indications here are meant to be more nuanced, and I think you could come up with things for other trials that would work as well. Establishment versus, you could definitely have conservative versus liberal. You could probably do urban versus rural. Although those would probably align nowadays. I don't know. Anyway, we got these nice overview cards and details. I haven't looked at them too carefully, but they should help guide me through without having to picture through the rules. Maybe this first time, though, I will need to look at the rules more. I have to go to the dentist today, so I don't know if I'm actually going to get this started or just load up the intro. And then tomorrow, and yes, I pronounce my tomorrow with an L at the end. There's something my wife loved to tease me about. But yeah, I have a hike I'm going to be going on. So I don't know how quickly this is going to get out there, but I wanted to get started on something. And I don't know. What's cool about this is something I want to play. I don't know what the next thing I want to play is going to be, but I know I've got another review copy from CSL, and man, that I intend to get to, the Milosevic one. I haven't started the rolls on it yet, and I just don't know. So far, I feel like I've kind of fired blanks a couple of times on that. And he's trying to convince me to do playtesting type videos, I guess, that'll be public. That's the only way I'll do it. But for a couple of his games, because he's getting stuff out of these. But man,